Welcome to the Politics and Society podcast. I'm Harry and I'm here with host Marv. Today we're talking about the Seanad Éireann, Ireland's upper house, and what you need to know before the 2025 Seanad election. We'll explore its history, how it works, its role in shaping laws, and the ongoing debate about its place in modern Irish politics. We'll also discuss how senators are elected, the Taoiseach nominees, and what this all means for Ireland's future. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. So Marv, I think it's a fitting way to start on the history of the Seanad. So I know you're the historian here. The Constitution of the Irish Free State, adopted in 1922, seems to be where we begin with the Seanad.
Yeah, so essentially, as most of us would know, Dáil Éireann was established in 1919 at the start of the War of Independence. Then we have the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, and under the terms of the treaty creating the new Irish Free State, we have the creation of another house of the Oireachtas called Seanad Éireann. So that's the upper house. And essentially the Seanad is kind of designed as a bit of a kind of check on the Dáil, and it's also a way at this time to secure, say, representation of certain minorities in the new Free State. So what you get in the Seanad that's established by the 1922 Constitution is a house that's composed of quite a lot of former Southern Unionists, so kind of the old kind of Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy. You know, you have, if you look through the list of members from those times, like the first ever Cathaoirleach of Seanad Éireann, so essentially think Ceann Corla, was a man called Lord Glenavy. You have loads of counts and countesses and earls, and so, you know, it's composed a lot of the aristocracy and religious minorities, kind of in the knowledge that the new the Dáil in the new state is going to be obviously composed a lot of Irish nationalists, mostly Catholic. So it's a way to secure kind of their interest in legislation, and then that's all grand until about the early 90s, when Eamon de Valera leads Fianna Fáil to victory in 1932 on a Republican manifesto. So he wants to rip up the Anglo-Irish Treaty, and so he goes on a legislating agenda to kind of rip up the treaty. So they get rid of the oath of allegiance to the Free State Constitution, which was the primary cause of the Civil War. They get rid of the office of the Governor-General. They remove all reference to the British King in 1936 during the abdication crisis in Britain at that time, and bringing the External Relations Act. But the thing is, De Valera is getting quite frustrated at the Seanad at this time, because he finds that they're kind of a stumbling block to his agenda, because, as we said, you know, it's composed of a lot of the minority who obviously want to maintain a lot of links to Britain, and he finds that the Seanad actually has quite a lot of teeth in the legislative agenda. So De Valera makes it his mission to get rid of the Seanad at this time, and he actually manages to do that in 1936, and he abolishes the Seanad. And when the new constitution, that is currently our constitution, Bunart na Éireann, is enacted in 1937, they bring back the Seanad, but with significantly weaker powers, and that's the Seanad that we have today.
Yeah, so as you mentioned there, they do have very little power to block Dáil legislation, you know. But even in blocking Dáil legislation, if memory serves, I think they can block it for 90 days. They can veto a bill for 90 days.
Yeah, that's right.
And then it's kind of a case of, you know, it's going to pass anyways. But I don't think that's really what the Seanad has become nowadays, you know. I think, as you were mentioning there, the main role of the Seanad as we see now in relation to legislation might be a bill might start there, or most likely it will start in the Dáil, but they could propose amendments, they can reject certain aspects of it, and they can invite people like civil or public life to address the chamber on areas of expertise. You know, we see this with the Seanad public consultation committees, or they might even invite Oireachtas committees in as we see with the whole RTE fiasco. So, they do have plenty of other functions. And as they did put it to the people in a referendum to see, is the Seanad worth keeping? And, the people spoke. So here today we still have our Seanad. So it still does play a relevant role, Marv, doesn't it, in our modern democracy today?
Well, yeah, it's still there, and as you say, it's composed of 60 people, 60 senators who, again, are all legislators in the Oireachtas, can all propose legislation. And in fact, one of probably the most talked about bills in Ireland in recent times is the Occupied Territories Bill, and that bill started in Seanad Éireann. That was the brainchild of Senator Francis Black, passed through the Seanad. Not the previous session, the one before, the one from 2016, and passed through the Seanad then, and it's now up to the Dáil to pass it. So again, like that's a really significant proposed piece of legislation that started in Seanad Éireann. As you correctly said, there has been loads of referendums to do with the Seanad based on reform of how the House is elected. Because if we go back to the Free State Seanad, the Free State Seanad, believe it or not, was actually a directly elected house. Well, actually not all of it. About, I think, a third of it was directly elected. And they had an election, which is actually, by the way, more than what the current Seanad is. And they had an election for those, I think, 20s in 1925, and the turnout was something like 20%. So very, very, very low. And that's when they got rid of that kind of afterwards. So the Seanad is... the electoral system is a lot different. So there's 6 seats that are for graduates of certain universities. We can talk about that in a minute. 43 are elected by sitting TDs and senators and councillors, and then 11 are appointed directly by the new Taoiseach. There's been sorry,
that's something we'll probably get into now in the next section. It's just, in terms of the Seanad's main function, there also is some aspects of government and bills that they cannot actually have any say in. So bills that will result in any government spending, you have your money bills that come from the Dáil, cannot be amended by the Seanad. And the Seanad does have other functions, like the removal of office of the President or a judge of the Supreme Court, Court of Appeals or higher court declaring a state of emergency, so that's something that we did have a state of emergency. We had a COVID pandemic quite recently, so these are all things which are quite relevant. And it's to become a senator, we'll be segueing into our next section. You must be a citizen of Ireland and over 21 years old. And I think one of the terms of running for the Seanad is you can't be in jail for more than 6 months or something like that. I think I saw, I didn't even pass any heed to it, but the basic premise of it is a citizen of Ireland over 21 years old, and obviously you need to be nominated as well. So I think that's a decent enough segue to move into our next section, which is the upcoming Seanad election of 2025. The Seanad election, just to briefly overview what Marv mentioned there, it's comprised of 60 members known as senators. 11 of the senators are nominated by the Taoiseach, so 49 will be elected in this Seanad up and coming election. There's 5 vocational panels, which the TDs, the outgoing senators and the councillors will vote on. Those 5 vocational panels are cultural and educational. There's 5 seats, agricultural 11 seats, labour 11 seats, industrial and commercial 9 seats, and finally the administrative panel, which has 7 seats. And as I mentioned, the following people may vote on the vocational panel: members of the incumbent Dáil, members of the outgoing Seanad, and members of the county council. So moving on to your panel now, Marv, the university panel. I know it's one which you'll be voting in very soon, as will I, as an NUI graduate, but that will soon change.
Correct, yeah. So again, this also involves a little bit of history that I have to mention. But yeah, as you said, there's 6 seats set aside for university graduates, 3 of them for NUI graduates. So they're the the universities of UCD, NUIG, UCC, and what's the other one I'm forgetting? Manu. So those universities are under the heading of National University of Ireland, and then there's 3 seats for Trinity College Dublin, or the official title is University of Dublin. Now, in 1979, there was a referendum to open up the university panel to all university graduates of Irish universities, so the likes of DCU, the likes of University of Limerick, and this was actually 92% of the people voted for that proposal, but the successive governments for 45 years never legislated for this. And a few years ago, a student from the University of Limerick took a case to the Supreme Court. His name is Tomás Heenahan, and he essentially said, well, under this referendum, which has never been legislated for, I have a right to vote in the Seanad, but it's never been legislated for, so my democratic rights are being infringed. And the Supreme Court actually ruled in his favour. So because of that, the previous government, before the last general election in November, put in legislation to change this. So currently now there's a website open called seanadvoter.ie, and so I got a letter in the door as an NUI graduate to say that I had to re-register through this to be in the next panel. So for the next Seanad election after these ones, the 6-seater university panel will be open to graduates of all universities because of this Supreme Court case. But as of now, this is going to be the last Seanad election under the traditional 3-seat NUI panel and 3-seat Trinity panel. And as I mentioned there, I'll have the NUI vote because I have a master's degree from University College Dublin.
Yeah, like as you mentioned, the university panels, NUI will have 3 seats, and the members of the University of Dublin, Trinity College, will also have 3 seats. It is a very interesting panel because to actually get your name on the ticket is very different to the vocational panel, and it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
I think there's 28 contesting for the university panel seats, if memory serves. I'm not actually sure. I can't seem to find that figure. But nomination for the vocational panel is quite different. Each vocational panel comprises of 2 sub-panels. A certain minimum number of members must be elected from each sub-panel. So nominating bodies sub-panel is the first. Each nominating body registered in respect of the panel may nominate a fixed number of candidates, and then finally the Oireachtas sub-panel, any 4 members of the newly elected Dáil or outgoing Seanad may nominate 1 candidate, which seems to be the most popular way. But in some cases, as we saw in the news most recently, Simon Harris actually added one Sharon Tolan, councillor in Meath, added her along with another candidate to the Seanad election. So there has to be a certain number on each panel running in the election, and if it's not reached, the Senate or the Taoiseach can fill that vacancy. So that's interesting as well. And as you were mentioning, Ian, about the democracy, the democratic value behind the Seanad, it seems to be quite an elitist kind of a vote. It really is. It's like the jobs for friends, as they may say, but especially with the university panel, it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out when it becomes, a universal kind of a university panel rather than the very linear one as we have currently. It will be interesting to see. Obviously, we won't have 60 members of the Seanad after the election results because we're still going to be waiting on the 11 of the Taoiseach nominees, which also are quite controversial in their own right as well. But
very much so.
That might be a story for another day. So I think we covered basically all bases there on the Seanad election, and just to give you a brief insight into the history of it and what to expect in the election, because a lot of the information may not be as clear as it may seem, or it might be quite hard to come about. So Marv, any final words for the Seanad election of 2025?
Any final words? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting for me because this is my first time ever casting a vote in Seanad Éireann, and I believe I'm the first one in my family to have a Seanad vote. So I like you mentioned the thing about elitists. Like I definitely feel like I'm part of the bourgeoisie now with a vote in the upper house. But yeah, it is. It's very much kind of. It's always something that's up for debate about. Do we need the Seanad? Does it actually serve a purpose? Because there's the perception that, again, like you said, that it's being used sometimes to kind of put politicians back in who've lost their Dáil seats, or that it doesn't have a lot of independence from the government, that it's quite a weak house. So it's we could have a conversation about this for hours and hours and hours, but we do have to cut somewhere. But in terms of what might happen in terms of composition, we've been talking about this off air, but definitely you'll get a heavy Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael representation because they have a strong strong amount of local councillors and also newly elected TDs. So expect them to win a lot of the seats in the panels, and then obviously the 11 senators will be appointed by the new Taoiseach, which will include Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in that government. So don't expect a radically different composition to what we see in Dáil, Éireann.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'd like to thank you all for listening to the podcast again. And if there's anything you'd like to see us discuss or talk about or explain in greater detail, please reach out and leave a comment on the video, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.